Today on Sekulow, Kamala Harris dodges questions on our relationship with Israel, and we remember the tragedy of October 7th.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Folks, more than just now, 1 year ago, more than 1,200 men, women, and children, including 46 Americans and citizens of more than 30 countries, were slaughtered by Hamas. 254 people were taken hostage, including 12 Americans. 4 of those Americans, Hersh Goldberg-Pollen, Atay Shin, Judy Weinstein, and Gad Haggai, were murdered by Hamas. 4 were released through an agreement in the United States negotiated last November, and we believe 4 remain in captivity in Gaza. We do not know if they are dead or alive. In all, an estimated 97 hostages remain held in Gaza today, marking 1 year since the horrendous attack by Hamas inside Israel, the most Jews killed in one day since the Holocaust. So with all the wars that Israel's been involved in, since its founding, the Independence War in 1948, the Six-Day War, and the 1967 War, the list goes on, then the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. These battles with Hamas in the past, even with Hezbollah in the past, we've not seen numbers like this. So though it has been a year, and in some ways it feels like a very long year, and in some ways it feels like this just happened yesterday. I remember where I was with a U.S. senator doing work, and we all kind of got the news the night before. But at that point, Logan, when you got that alert that there had been some kind of attack in Israel, it was pretty late at night, I think. And those aren't so unusual. No. And we didn't realize what we were going to wake up to, the level of brutality that would be on our television screen on those morning shows.
Yeah, I think a lot of us felt it over the weekend as we sort of approached this 1 year anniversary, and we started seeing all of the clips, all of the reminders, all the people starting to post, and on both sides of this issue, unfortunately. And we even saw our own Vice President, who's currently running for president, have to respond to some questions. We're going to play some of that. I know a lot of you are watching right now. You probably see the title. You wonder what we're talking about. Kamala Harris was directly asked about her relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu and how that is. Here, let's go ahead and take a listen to that as she dodges this very important question on this anniversary, where we look back and remember what happened on October 7th of last year. And this was just yesterday.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
It's a very big non-answer coming out of Vice President Harris, which was a pretty direct one. Just, do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu? Her answer was, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that is yes.
It's bizarre, because you could even say that about many of the Iranian people that live under the authoritarian of the Ayatollah. Would you say that, oh, well, we can't work with the Ayatollah, but there's many Iranian people we love our relationship with? The Israeli people make up the IDF. Right. Everyone serves. They serve their country. Everyone doesn't vote for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And you don't have to say, you don't have to say like he's the only politician that only we'd ever support. What you say is that he's the duly elected leader of Israel. And the people of Israel are our allies, and if that is their leader, we're going to work with the leader they choose. We're not going to get ourselves involved in Israel's domestic politics. But while they say that other countries are getting involved in our politics, the left has been getting involved in Israeli politics since, I think, the Clinton years. At least we can document that.
Yeah, absolutely. Give us a call right now at 1-800-684-3110. On this 1 year remembrance, we'd love to hear from you. Tulsi Gabbard's joining us coming up, as well as Jeff Balaban from ACLJ Jerusalem. And support the work of the ACLJ. We need the world leaders to hear your voice in support of Israel. Today's an important day. It's a somber day. It's one that we remember, and one that we must not forget. Go to aclj.org right now. We'll be right back.
Federal authorities issue in this statement, and I quote, "The FBI and DHS assess the one-year anniversary of the October 7, 2023 attacks that initiated the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, as well as any further significant escalations in the conflict, may be a factor for violent extremists and hate crime perpetrators to engage in violence or threaten public safety. Individuals inspired by online messaging could act alone to commit an attack with little to no warnings."
Exactly 1 year after Hamas's horrific terror attack on Israel, Vice President Kamala Harris is still refusing to acknowledge Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as an ally to the United States.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
She couldn't say that she was an ally of Benjamin Netanyahu's. What was your response to that?
Well, I think that it just drives home, again, Kamala Harris's entire approach to this crisis has been to, with the one hand, say, well, maybe we kind of support Israel, and then with the other hand, actually pursue policies that prolongs the war. If you actually want peace in the region, if you want to preserve civilian life, and most importantly, if you want to enable Israel to build the kind of long-term security for itself in the region, then you have to support policies that will get the war over as quickly as possible. Kamala Harris has sort of been at the forefront of threatening to stab our allies in the back.
When we established the Abraham Accords, we were close to bringing the Saudis in. Well, I think we can do that in the next term with President Trump. And I think what you're going to see is some type of stabilization in the Middle East, a very positive stabilization, not what you see today.
Back to Sekulow. We are taking your calls too, 1-800-684-3110. And think about what has happened since October 7th. That we have seen President Biden drop out of the race, and the Democrats bring in someone new. That was obviously the vice president, but got no votes for a primary. We've had we've had debates. We've learned who Tim Walz is. We've learned more about J.D. Vance. We have seen a former president, current presidential candidate, be shot live on stage and then return to that city like he did over the weekend with a rally that Elon Musk, of all people, if you would put that down on the board, that Elon Musk would be doing rallies with President Trump. But I think it all started with October 7th because it showed the world the brutality and the hatred that was the evil that was still brewing inside the world of radical Islam, which has now been really overtaken by Iran. So Iran, a 12-er Shia Islamic country, is now open to work with non-Shia Islamic terror groups like Hamas, the Islamic Resistance Movement. Hezbollah, which is their own, is a Shia movement. Usually in the past, they would have fought each other, actually. But, they work with the Houthis. They work with basically whoever will take their money and do their bidding so that they don't have to always be the ones on the front lines. And we've seen them try and launch these missile barrages. And I don't want to, again, downplay those more than they should be because you send in 200 ballistic missiles. That's not nothing. It's just that Israel has a great defense system that, by the way, we worked on with Israel, the United States, so that we can also utilize that for protection of our own country and our own troops, these mobile Iron Dome type units. And so while Israel has been engaged in a conflict for nearly a year, and now it appears to be that there will be a new conflict. I mean, the conflict has already begun, but whether or not how far they will go with boots on the ground into Lebanon with Hezbollah. And yet we get from Harris and the Biden administration pledges of money that will go to Lebanon while they are currently harboring Hezbollah. And if you want to learn a little about Lebanon, I'm not trying to hate on Lebanon, but they have their own military separate from Hezbollah. They have their own government separate from Hezbollah. Hezbollah does get elected with inside. They have a political movement that is allowed to run for office, which, again, we've seen now how those supposedly separate groups are not separate at all. So I think it should fall on the Lebanese people, their military. You don't like the fact that Hezbollah fires rockets at Israel. If you really don't like that, then why not get Hezbollah out of your country? Why not use your own troops? Why does it have to be the rest? Why does the United States need to rebuild Beirut if you are harboring a terrorist group with your own military? Why doesn't the world say, fine, if they do want to do it, here's the money and weapons to do it. You fight Hezbollah. You take them on. Why don't you get them off the border with northern Israel? Why is that the UN's job? Why is that Israel's job? And I think we have to start looking at countries like that once again. If you are going to harbor these groups and you're too afraid to fight them, then I don't think you should be getting money to rebuild any of your buildings. The blood is on your hands too. It may not be as direct, but you obviously aren't willing to die for the freedom or independence of your country like members of our military are.
Yeah, and currently, we can't forget the fact that just a few months ago on college campuses, it's still happening somewhat, but of course that got essentially exported to here after the October 7th massacre. Just weeks later, maybe let's say a couple months later.
Yeah, it's usually like 6 weeks.
6 weeks of mourning, and then all of a sudden it turned on Israel, and we had those massive protests on college campuses across the country. And even today, we have at high schools in Washington planned walkouts in support of, support essentially against Israel. There's an ad for it right now. 365 Days of Genocide is what they're calling it. Walkout for Palestine, which is happening today. And so we have that still happening, not only now on our college campuses, but now in our high schools. And it's a sober reminder of where we are. And just reading comments today, I saw random celebrities posting support of Israel, and just to go through the comments quickly, and some of them were very much still to bring them home, hostage kind of comments. And the first ones are, you got to be kidding me, right? These kind of comments on nothing controversial, on nothing political, on just, hey, the hostages are still there, still over 100, and we need to take care of it. But still the comments from what seems to be the American people are saying, how dare you, David Arquette, a random celebrity posting something that should not be offensive to anyone. But it is, and it's, again, a sobering reminder of where we are today, a year later, you kind of dreading this anniversary coming up today, because it's not a situation where the world came together. It's actually a situation where the world was very separated.
Yeah, the world came together for 2 weeks, which is what we do for Israel. If you watch the initial news reports, they've done a good job of this. Maybe we can pull it for the second half of the show. It's on social media. The first couple weeks where this happened, you saw CNN anchors, MSNBC anchors, international anchors, BBC crying on air about the babies who were killed during the October 7th attacks. I know that just at one kibbutz, 40 babies under the age of 1 were killed, and the woman had to say some decapitated.
Yeah.
And this was international media. And yet if you go and watch those same media reports now, you will mostly hear about Israeli supposed atrocities, though they never have video of it. They can never show it to you. It's all reports from the Hamas news agency or the Palestinian Authority news agency. They don't have real-time video. They don't show you these people getting killed. But you know what Hamas did? They did wear body cameras that showed the world, if you want to see exactly what they did inside Israel and who was guilty. And again, we know that the UN had its own staff working for Hamas and helping to plan the October 7th attacks. And the UN has said our staff is universally immune from prosecution. Even if they're on one of those videos killing someone, they can't be prosecuted because they also worked for the UN. It's disgusting at a point in time. And I think it's actually just pulled back the veil of evil in the world, and why the good guys have to keep standing up. And you have to stand on the right side of history, whether or not it's the popular view at your college campus, because I think at this point too, they're not kids, they're adults. Stop calling them kids. They are adults for purposes of the United States, because those same age kids go and fight and die for the United States of America in our military. They have the internet. They could see what Hamas did. If they're okay with that, then they're just as evil. Now, they can use their speech. You can't do anything about that. Of course. But if they start calling to kill or calling, that's not protected speech. And we live in a place where you can be canceled because you joined movements that were disgusting or that trouble the kind of nation to its core. So I hope that for most of these young people who came out flying Hamas flags, that follows them and ruins them for the rest of their life, because they know what it is. There's no excuses anymore. For these high school students in Washington State, I guess it's their parents really who are pushing this, because That I don't even think that most of them would even have the search access allowed to see the amount of depravity used by these terrorist groups. But the older ones in those classes too, they know how to get. They know what Hamas did. See, that's what I'm telling you. The media, no one said that this was this purported by Israel. The media fully accepts the atrocities, the rape, the killing of children, the decapitation, burning people alive, all in one day, and then taking over 200 people hostage. No one is saying that that's not correct, and yet they're still siding with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas.
For some reason, it feels like, and when you brought it up, a lot of the focus is on the music festival, and that happened. Obviously, it was an incredible atrocity. But it does feel like the children and the kibbutzes have kind of been forgotten, that all happened as well.
Right.
Because that was sort of
they don't have a voice.
It was a different kind of undertaking than the music festival portion of it. So we do have to remind ourselves of that, because that one is one I don't even see people talking about anymore.
Why? It's because when they were killed, their whole family was killed.
And it's much tougher to hear. It's weirdly, because you're talking about children and families. It's
easier for the news
to kind of just go, oh yeah, it was the music festival and a bunch of adults, teenagers and adults got killed, which is again horrendous. But it's not. You can't go on there and defend any of this. And you're right that it is a sad thing that has swept this nation. And look, I'm going to encourage you. You said you have to stand up and make a voice. Not only obviously support our work and what we're doing at ACLJ Jerusalem. We're going to hear from Jeff Balaban in the next segment. But I know this is a weird one if you're watching on social media, especially if you're watching on like YouTube, to hit that thumbs up because you're like, oh, I don't support what's going on and all that. But I encourage you,
share the show.
You click that button, that thumbs up button right now. It's going to help more people see this message. And this message is not in the mainstream right now. Maybe from the conservative media you're hearing it. Maybe you're hearing sort of this sort of word salad coming out of Vice President Harris. We got even more of that to play coming up in the next segment, so you can even hear more of that response, because they've started to do press. We've seen Harris now starting to show up. He's going to be on Howard Stern tomorrow, showing up in very interesting outlets, different podcasts. And Tim Walz even making an appearance with Shanna Bream yesterday on Fox News. So we'll cover some of that also coming up, as well as continue our discussion about Israel. And then Tulsi Gabbard will be joining us later on to not only talk about Israel, but also talk about her relief efforts and what she was doing in Western North Carolina, and what is going to happen, obviously, as Central Florida even preps for what could be a massive storm as well. Give us a call if we would love to hear from you. 1-800-684-3110. Again, 1 year ago, we all watched in the horrors that unfolded in Israel, and we have been there supporting our Israeli friends, having the ACLJ Jerusalem office open and ready for action. Go to aclj.org to support it right now. In terms of the war in Israel, as we know, the top leaders of Hezbollah, multiple top leaders, it felt like it kept coming in, were taken out.
Pretty much the entire leadership structure, especially when it pertains to the missile and rockets force, which is the force of Hezbollah that is the strongest and also constantly targeting Israel to the south. Every single member of leadership has been eliminated. And that comes with the taking out of Nasrallah, who was for more than 30 years the leader, the Secretary General, as he was referred to, of Hezbollah, one of the largest non-state militias in the world, responsible for countless American soldiers' deaths, as well as those around the region. He was taken out in an airstrike in Beirut on Friday. We actually got reports of that airstrike while we were on air on Friday, and we're hoping that they were a successful targeting of Nasrallah. He has been an elusive figure for 30 years, being able to dodge assassination attempts and being taken out, being able to maintain his grip on Hezbollah and really on the country of Lebanon. While they're not the government of Lebanon, they are an extremely powerful force within that country and pretty much dominate the entire south of Lebanon on the border with Israel. He was successfully taken out by Israel as they continue to escalate their campaign against the terror leadership, whether it be Iran, Hamas, or Hezbollah, as we saw on Friday.
All right, and this is the start just this week of the High Holy Days, for the Jewish people and for the Israeli people, including Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, which I believe begins in just about 2 days on October 2nd. So, and of course, we're going to be at the 1 year of the vicious attacks by Hamas. So all of this is happening at the same time.
Hey, welcome back to Sekulow. We are taking your phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. We're joined by Jeff Balabon. I do want to play this for people. A lot of new people have joined. This is Kamala Harris this weekend talking to George Stephanopoulos on ABC. So, and she's getting questions. Was it Stephanopoulos? No, it was Bill Whitaker. So which show was this one? 60 Minutes. Okay, this is a pre-tape. And she gets asked directly about the relationship with her and what the work she's done with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Take a listen.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
So I want to go to Jeff Balabon there because, Jeff, again, this dodge to, again, not because all Israelis voted for Prime Minister Netanyahu, but he is the duly elected, democratically elected leader of Israel. And if you have a good relationship with the Israeli people, then that means you've got to have a good relationship with the Israeli people and voters that decided to bring Prime Minister Netanyahu back as their leader.
Yeah, Jordan, it's an insidious response on so many levels. The level you're pointing out, 100%, I agree with that. Also, it's historically the case that they have said that they've called Israeli prime ministers our friends. I mean, they refer to each other as friends. Netanyahu refers to Biden as a friend, even though there's a lot of stress in that relationship, and Biden has been less than a friend. But we see now with this new push, they're trying more and more to demonize him. And this really did not start with Kamala Harris. It started with Barack Obama. The Obama-Biden administration, they couldn't say we're anti-Israel, even though they were completely anti-Israel on policy. So they blamed Netanyahu. They demonized him and said, no, you can be pro-Israel and still not like Netanyahu. And then it was, you could be pro-Israel and not like Netanyahu's party. Well, he could, because they realized it was the biggest party and it supported all these. Now it turns out that there is a consensus in Israel. There was a vote in the Knesset where every member of Knesset that represented the Jewish parties, or Arab parties, or the Zionist parties, because there are a couple of non-Zionist parties, voted against the idea of a Palestinian state. Why? Precisely because this administration, Biden and Harris, have been pushing for it in the wake of October 7th. They've been pushing to reward terror by creating a terrorist state, which Israelis across the board are saying no to. And so they are trying to say it's about Netanyahu, when in fact they are absolutely oppositional to the Israeli people. The will of the Israeli people is no Palestinian state, but the will of the Democrats today is Palestinian state, regardless of what the Israelis want. And that's what's happening.
It's bizarre to me, too, that even if that is what these American politicians on the left think that they want, Jeff, I mean, the idea is that there's no one right now they can point to that could lead the Gaza Strip. There's no one they could point to that could be an alternative leader to Hamas that's strong enough or powerful enough to give the Palestinian people even a different option of leadership. So are they really talking about a Hamas-run independent state? And then is that somehow connected to the West Bank? Are they going to be separate places? Because they don't get along either. And what are the options there? You've got a billionaire autocrat and I guess his family, or they don't point to alternatives. So that's also it's an easy way not to have to deal with the issues, Jeff. It's kind of like they can say, well, until we get there, it's going to always be like this. And what we saw through the Abraham Accords and we've seen through diplomacy is that that's actually doesn't have to be the case if the U.S. takes a different approach and these countries realize, there's been a paradigm shift. And if we want to keep working with the U.S., we need to think about our own economies, issues like that. But I want to take this back to Israel because I don't think any of us a year ago today wanted to have to keep talking about the fact that there's still so many hostages that are hopefully some who are alive inside the Gaza Strip taken by Hamas. I don't think a year ago today we wanted to have to realize that there looks like there's another conflict with Hezbollah that is getting more and more serious each day. And while it's true, Jeff, that Israel's done an excellent job of taking out Hezbollah leadership, both their leaders who live underground and even their replacements before they can even get started, as well as their military leadership. Iran continues to fund them with weapons. We see more ballistic missiles than ever fired at Israel. And so these multi-front battles that Israel faces, along with the fact that the rest of the world has forgotten what occurred on October 7th. At least it seems they've forgotten about the atrocities.
So there are a few things here that you mentioned, Jordan. Let's start with the last one first. I don't think the rest of the world has forgotten it. I think it's even worse than that. There are reports today that at a private cabinet meeting, a new video was shown with even less censored and worse atrocities from October 7th, and the Prime Minister Netanyahu wants that out publicly. Unfortunately, I actually think that the more grotesque, the more evil, the more brutal the murder, rape, and torture of Israeli innocents is, the more the world tries to justify it by saying the Israelis are even worse. So the truth is that no amount of horror, and really there are no words for the horror of what took place on October 7th, no amount of horror will stop this march towards genocide of Israel and of the Jewish people, which is what these people want. They're out in the streets calling for it around the world, including in America. They want the destruction of the Jewish people. A week after October 7th, already out in the streets saying gas the Jews, kill the Jews. So this is not a small thing. This is part of thousands of years of history. And now we're seeing it repeated again. And I will say this, I want to go back to the beginning about whether Netanyahu is an ally. The fact is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is fighting America's fight. He's fighting the West's fight. He's sacrificing Jewish soldiers, Israeli soldiers on the front lines, fighting these barbarians who are saying openly that what they want is the destruction of our civilization, the destruction of Christian civilization, of Western civilization, not just of Jewish and Israeli civilization. That's what they say they want. And Israel's on the front line. There could be no greater ally to the American people than that. Is Kamala Harris an ally to the American people? Is Kamala Harris an ally to this war? Against she's an ally to those who are trying to fight us. That's what we're seeing here, and that's the problem. There's a division here, the left and the right. It's really a division of evil versus good. Israel's on the right side of this. America must be on the right side of that. There's no mistake that the timing is this, that the timing is right before our election, because America has a fundamental moral existential choice to make. And she could not have made it clear when she refused to stand with the leader of Israel and the Jewish people.
Jeff, that's absolutely right. We'll play coming up in the next segment a clip of kind of follow-up from Harris from this weekend, having those discussions. And it is one of those moments, you could feel it kind of creeping up, Jeff, this weekend, knowing that the anniversary during the High Holy Days, this is happening right now this year, that we were going to be hitting October 7th today, this Monday, over the weekend. You could just feel sort of the heaviness. Because as I spoke to Jordan, we only have about a minute left here, but it isn't even like a September 11th memorial where a year later the nation was still united in calling out the atrocity that happened there. It is this really bizarre, uncomfortable moment for our nation and for Israel.
You're right, Logan. This has always been a war of evil versus good, of death versus life. The enemy is very clear about it. That's what they say they want. They worship death. They say they love death more than we love life. And that's what this war is about. And it seems to challenge everybody's preconceived notions of basic humanity, because the other side doesn't have basic humanity. And that's the war that Israel's fighting. And if America is abandoning it, and to some extent America, the leadership has been abandoning it, then Israel finds it has to go it alone. And honestly, that's what everyone in Israel gets, from the secular to the religious, is there's no one to rely on but God. And that is the underlying feeling, both of this time of year, we're in the Jewish high holidays, but also of this entire past year, has been there's no one to rely on besides God. And the Israeli people, they're going to do the job and do what they can with God's help.
Support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. That also supports our work in Israel. That's aclj.org. Donate today.
Israel is under attack. And every day I see ordinary Israelis acting as champions. Not to win medals or glory, but literally fighting for their very right to live, to exist. Being a champion means choosing to do what's right, to do what's hard, no matter the cost. Here in Israel, it can be a dangerous stand to take, but it's essential if the Jewish state is going to survive. As an ACLJ member, you have an opportunity to be a champion too. You can make a difference. You can impact real change and defend life, liberty, religious freedom, while the media and the misinformed march in support of terrorists, even in America. You can stand strong for Israel. By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life, a champion of liberty,
a champion of freedom, a champion for Israel. Become an ACLJ champion. Go to aclj.org champions now.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are taking your calls to 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. It's great to have Jeff Balaban, our director of ACLJ Jerusalem, join us again to kind of just update people. Not only are we marking this day of October 7th as one that I hoped we would be maybe not celebrating, but at least being able to say, you know, that the conflict is over and that hostages, those who survived, would have been returned to their families, and we still have so many. I mean, when you really look at the number of, you know, there were over 1,000 people killed that day, about 1,200 killed, but 254 were taken hostage, and still about 100 remain. We don't know how many are alive or dead, but we do know that there's upwards of even 4 of our American brothers and sisters inside that group, and the horrors that they've had to experience as kidnapped by a terrorist organization like Hamas, proud of, which is why they wore those video cameras, proud of the atrocities that they carried out as well, Logan. I mean, which is, again, it kind of was a reminder in the world. It's been a reminder this entire year. I think that even with what we saw with President Trump, the shooting there, the assassination attempts, that this ongoing, this kind of evil around the world that creeps up sometimes when you least expect it. I mean, and this was one of those few times that Israel was not ahead of a major attack. It was not able to kind of strike first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy time in our nation and in Israel. Obviously, you have the storms that have happened over the week. You have then Harris coming out and saying, we're going to give all this money to Lebanon, but then you're talking about North Carolina still underwater and dealing with the horrors from that, and another storm headed to Florida in the next 2 days. It's one of those times where you walk out the door and you can't take it. You know, it feels so heavy. But Kamala Harris did go on sort of a few press stops and is doing a lot of press stops this week. She was on 60 Minutes, and we already played the clip where they asked about whether President or Prime Minister Netanyahu is an ally, and she kind of deflected. Here's sort of more of that, a follow-up that happened on that 60 Minutes piece.
Kamala, take a listen.
Work that we do diplomatically with the leadership of Israel is an ongoing pursuit around making clear our principles, which include the need for humanitarian aid, the need for this war to end, the need for a deal to be done, which would release the hostages and create a ceasefire. And we're not going to stop in terms of putting that pressure on Israel and in the region, including Arab leaders.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Anybody tell me what that means?
Yeah, I'd love someone to come on and translate exactly what that all was, because that was, again, the typical response, which it becomes almost like comedic.
The work we have done has resulted in a number of movements in the region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region. But she doesn't point to even one specific movement.
Look, this is very normal. This is her. This is the responses we always are getting from Vice President Harris. You don't want to be the person who just picks on little quirks or little things, but this becomes an issue where it's like, I'll monologue on anything if you give me a question, but it doesn't mean there'll be any substance to it. It's very common.
If you took out Israel, you could put anything. You could have put the North Carolina incident in there.
Yep.
Anything would have worked there because nothing specific. And either that's a strategy of we're not going to speak to specifics because we're afraid it's going to divide our party. But we know Tulsi Gabbard, others are not afraid to talk about those issues. Tulsi joining us in the next segment of the broadcast, as she's been very outspoken on the issue of October 7th, and Vice President Harris, too, why she posed the danger.
And today, the ACLJ, we're sending a demand letter to over 40 countries that allowed the UN General Assembly to condemn Israel, and in a vote that has emboldened Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Be a part of that response. Go to ACLJ.org and support our work and stand up for Israel. Tulsi Gabbard joining us when we get back.
Federal authorities issue in this statement, and I quote, the FBI and DHS assess the one-year anniversary of the October 7, 2023 attacks that initiated the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, as well as any further significant escalations in the conflict, may be a factor for violent extremists and hate crime perpetrators to engage in violence or threaten public safety. Individuals inspired by online messaging could act alone to commit an attack with little to no warnings.
Exactly 1 year after Hamas's horrific terror attack on Israel, Vice President Kamala Harris is still refusing to acknowledge Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as an ally to the United States.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
She couldn't say that she was an ally of Benjamin Netanyahu's. What was your response to that?
Well, I think that it just drives home again. Kamala Harris's entire approach to this crisis has been to, with the one hand, say, well, maybe we kind of support Israel, and then with the other hand, actually pursue policies that prolongs the war. If you actually want peace in the region, if you want to preserve civilian life, and most importantly, if you want to enable Israel to build the kind of long-term security for itself in the region, then you have to support policies that will get the war over as quickly as possible. Kamala Harris has sort of been at the forefront of threatening to stab our allies in the back.
When we established the Abraham Accords, we were close to bringing the Saudis in. Well, I think we can do that in the next term with President Trump. And I think what you're going to see is some type of stabilization in the Middle East, a very positive stabilization, not what you see today.
To Sekulow. Tulsi Gabbard is joining us. She's a member of our team here at Sekulow, and she's, of course, been traveling the country talking to independent voters and conservative voters as well, with President Trump, with RFK Jr., doing events and get out the vote, and we appreciate that work as well. But Tulsi, I want to go to you first on a tweet you sent out today on October 7th, because we live in a world that, again, when this horrendous attack occurred, those of us who kind of specialize, we have an office in Israel, been focused there for decades, knew that Israel would have a very short period of time where the world might, and did, show them some real sympathy, or at least fake it. And we saw it through all the different news broadcasts, even international news, even in some inside the Muslim world that were questioning whether Hamas, what they had done had gone too far and actually hurt the way the world would view even Muslims around the world. And we all said, though, quietly and behind the scenes, and the Israelis knew it, Tulsi, that would last for about 2 weeks. And then once Israel actually began to respond, because there were hostages that they're still taken, that the world would totally forget the children that were killed or decapitated on October 7th, the families that were eliminated on October 7th, the hostages that were taken, the women who were publicly raped in the streets. And the world would forget that and just focus in on trying to blame Israel, to the point where here in the United States, we still have protests calling for the elimination of the Jewish state of Israel.
Yeah, it is a tragedy to see that here we are 1 year later, and quite frankly, nothing has significantly changed. Part of the problem here, which is leaders like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and others refusing to accurately identify what this threat really is. What was the driver? Who was the driver behind that tragic and horrific terrorist attack against Israel 1 year ago today? It should be no surprise that there is no solution. There is no significant progress from a global standpoint against this underlying threat when we have leaders who refuse to identify and perhaps don't even want to try to understand what this threat really is. And this threat is a threat coming from radical Islamist terrorists. Israel obviously knows this more than probably anyone else in the world, given they are surrounded by these threats, whether it's coming from Hamas or Hezbollah, now even with support from the Houthis. They understand in a very real way on an almost everyday basis what this threat is. The fact that Kamala Harris still refuses to utter the words radical Islamist terrorists, what to speak of actually being able to articulate the ideology that these Islamist terrorist groups are spreading around the world, that we're seeing on full display on some of our college campuses, and how dangerous of a threat that really is to civilization, to freedom-loving societies. It should be no surprise then that she cannot be trusted to defeat this threat, which can only be defeated both ideologically and militarily. She cannot be trusted as our commander-in-chief for this and many other reasons, and this should weigh into the decision that we as voters make as we head into the final 30-day stretch of this election.
Tulsi, I wanted to kind of ask you too. I mean, to me, it speaks to, we've learned more about Tim Walz. We got to see that last week, and we got to the idea that now that Harris has decided she will do some more interviews, and we've seen kind of the same, just word salads, nothing really specific, not ever showing off really any knowledge on even the most hot button issues. I mean, this isn't like we're going like so deep into issues that are happening around the world that you need to be able to do as president, but issues that are front page issues for the last year. And she's not able really to speak to them or even craft a strategy. To me, it's scary for our allies like Israel when they know that the enemies they face, Iran funding all of these actions, poses a real threat not just to Israel but the world, including many predominantly Muslim countries in the Middle East and the Gulf. And at the same time, here in the United States, this kind of ignorance about an open border and the terrorists that have been identified on that open border. That was one of our FOIAs that they tried to shut down because they put up through customs and ICE actually put up the pictures of two Yemenis that were arrested as suspected terrorists at the border, and they took that off of their website because it went against the narrative. We saw the emails from our FOIA that Tulsi, it went against the narrative of the Biden-Harris administration about who was utilizing our porous borders.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They don't want the American people to know the truth. We do know for a fact there have been a number of people who have illegally crossed our borders who are actually on our terror watch list. What to speak of the many who have not been identified, whose names have not been run through any kind of database, who have positioned themselves in our country. We know there are Hezbollah.
Lost Tulsi there. We'll try to reconnect with her in just a moment here, so we'll redial her. I know we were having some technical issues there. If you'd like to be on the air also in the next segment, we're going to take as many calls as we can at 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. I'd love to hear from Tulsi coming up about the work she's doing also on the ground in North Carolina, in Tennessee, and in Georgia. So we will do that coming up. Let's go ahead and take a phone call. David's calling from Illinois on line 2. David, you're on the broadcast.
Hi, as an American, Israeli Jewish American, I just want to share that there's a unique pain for us today living in America, as opposed to people in Israel where their pain is validated, everyone understands it. But here in America, we're kind of, even on October 7th, we're kind of hiding our Jewishness, our identity, and that brings up a lot of pain because we don't even have one day where we can mourn.
Yeah, David, I think a lot of us feel that way, and sort of the heaviness, as I said, coming over the weekend. Was that feeling of knowing that it doesn't feel as safe as it once was to be openly Jewish in America, something you never thought that you would hear in modern history, especially in sort of these liberal hotbed states where you think it would have been the most comfortable you can be in New York City or somewhere like that. But unfortunately, it feels quite the opposite. I remember
here the most security I've seen in the last year has been around the synagogues, even that are inside predominantly high-end suburban areas.
Yeah, I've seen more Israeli flags flying in rural Tennessee than I have in New York City. And sadly, that's just the case. We do have Tulsi back joining us. And Tulsi Slogan, I did want to ask you about also the work that you're doing in North Carolina, in Georgia, and Tennessee. I know you were visiting the hurricane damage in the cities. It's just a tragedy. Just a few hours from where we're broadcasting right now. And I watched your video and I actually made a donation to We Must Protect, which is your organization. It is something that we as the American people are going to have to turn on because it doesn't feel like they're getting the response they need.
Yeah, thanks so much for talking about the continued plight that so many of our fellow Americans are facing across 6 different states. I was in Georgia and North Carolina a couple of days ago and spent time visiting some of the more rural communities that, quite frankly, are not getting the kind of attention that they deserve, given so many saw their businesses swept away in this wall of water, their homes, their livelihoods, and are just trying to figure out how to get from one day to the next. My nonprofit, and thank you for your contribution, it's called We Must Protect. We stood this up in the wake of the tragic fires in Lahaina and Maui in my home state. We're able to help folks as they went through a difficult period there and are doing the same here now for those who are survivors of Hurricane Helene. I'm getting text messages every day. I mean, we brought out a trailer full of chainsaws, generators, fuel, oil, basic things that they specifically requested. We're getting text messages asking for, used vehicles and trucks. People had their vehicles swept away in the river, asking for Starlink connections for volunteer fire departments. And these are for communities that are way off the beaten path. Maybe they've got a population of 1,000 people or less, but their lives and their well-being is just as important as those who live closer to these major hubs. So I'm in constant touch with the Speaker of the House in North Carolina, Tim Moore, who's a phenomenal leader and who's doing so much to help bring together those who are able to provide support with those across his state who are in need of support. We've raised close to $350,000 just over the last 72 hours, and every penny of that is going to go directly towards those who really, really need help the most. And I just want to mention our prayers are with folks in Florida right now as Milton continues to build its strength, and we will be there for them as our fellow Americans during their time of need.
Tulsi, thank you so much. And look, we've been looking for partners in this as we've raised funds as well to make sure the money is going to the right places and the right people are getting it. And I trust you and we trust you here. So we'll talk to you a bit later and really figure out how we can work even more direct with your relief efforts. And We Must Protect. So we appreciate all that you have done, not only for us here at the ACLJ, but for these horrible victims of the atrocities that are happening through these storms. And again, like you said, our prayers are with the families in Florida. And we will see what happens. Obviously, our hope is that it diverts. Something could happen, that a miracle happens. Give us a call. Also, if you want to be on the air at 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Again, support Israel and support the ACLJ at aclj.org. We'll be right back.
On October 7th, 2023, Israel faced an unimaginable horror. Thousands of jihadist rockets and Hamas militants flooded into Israel, unleashing unthinkable devastation. It was an all-out war. Innocent Israeli civilians were murdered, and many were taken as hostages. This was the deadliest, most violent assault on Israel in years. More Jews were killed in a single day than at any time since the Holocaust.
These terrorists have one goal in mind. It's to slaughter as many civilians as possible.
And yet we warned this could happen. The Biden-Harris administration has been undermining Israel and empowering its enemies. At the ACLJ, we're mobilizing our office in Jerusalem to defend Israel on the world stage, standing up for Israel's right to defend itself.
Global leaders need to hear from you. Add your name and stand with Israel today.
Israel is under attack. And every day I see ordinary Israelis acting as champions. Not to win medals or glory, but literally fighting for their very right to live, to exist. Being a champion means choosing to do what's right, to do what's hard, no matter the cost. Here in Israel, it can be a dangerous stand to take, but it's essential if the Jewish state is going to survive. As an ACLJ member, you have an opportunity to be a champion too. You can make a difference. You can impact real change and defend life, liberty, religious freedom, while the media and the misinformed march in support of terrorists, even in America. you can stand strong for Israel. By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life, a champion of liberty, a champion of freedom, a champion for Israel. Become an ACLJ champion. Go to aclj.org champions now.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. I do want to, again, just remind people that 1 year ago, as we watched the horror in Israel, the Americans that also were killed, slaughtered, and taken hostage. I remember we represented hostage families and brought those families to Washington, D.C., knowing that the likelihood of those stories ending well is not high. But meeting with House leadership and meeting with both on the Republican side and Democrat side. And I remember stepping in to the daily press conference by House leaders and Mike Johnson, who had not been Speaker very long, and some of our other friends in House leadership. And we got those families, they brought them up. And I think you're seeing images of this right now if you're watching the show. And Mike, someone we've known a long time, Speaker Johnson, and he said, I want to thank the work of Jay and Jordan Sekulow for getting these folks here today. And you know, people kind of realized we were in the room. And, you know, it was, again, we were able to cut through a lot of politics. We did a briefing for House Democrats, some who attended who knew, you know, that were on the other side of us when we represented President Trump in the first impeachment, putting those issues aside. But even inside the Democrat Party, there was a lot of pressure on them not to be too strong in their condemnation of people like Rashida Tlaib at the time. That is the briefing we did for House Democrats. You'll see in that picture Jared Moskowitz, who's one of the Democrats not afraid to go on Fox News. Even Dan Goldman, who was another one who you will see more frequently, who was the top attorney for the impeachment team on the other side of us. So it was an issue that, again, cut through partisan politics. Still does for those of Jewish background and faith. But overall, was, again, a couple of weeks of you didn't see a lot of condemnation of the Jewish state of Israel at all. Unfortunately, we knew that would only last so long as Israel didn't fight back. It was like, we'll feel bad for Israel and the Jews, but, you know, once they actually respond,
went to war,
and start, you know, again, the consequences, there had to be consequences for what Hamas did. We would respond. My God, we respond for a lot less and do a lot more to countries. But we now know how important it is as individual Americans to support Israel. It's why we have ACLJ Jerusalem. It's not the Israel Center for Law and Justice. It's ACLJ, the American Center for Law and Justice Jerusalem, making that point that the American people are donating to put this office here, to stand with Israel, to support Israel, to defend Israel wherever we have to, whether that's the UN, whether that's international courts, whether it's here on a broadcast, educating people. We will always do that. And that's, again, because of our donors, our supporters. And so we want to remind you to support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. If you can make a donation, that is great because it goes to those efforts. And we also have a petition up at aclj.org/defend Israel, because right now Israel, and I think politically, we know that the politics of America directly affect what happens to our ally Israel and the people of Israel. And the weakness of the Biden-Harris administration certainly encouraged Iran to fund the October 7th attacks. And the strength of a potential Trump administration scares Iran because they know on day one they're going to be cut off from the world economically, and their people won't have bread. And we always say when people don't have bread and they don't have water, they're not real focused on Israel anymore. They're focused on throwing out their own government leaders. And we were getting close there in Iran. And, of course, the Biden-Harris team comes back in, and what do? Make sure Iran is flush with cash. And what does Iran do? Carries out the worst, funds the worst attack on Israel and Jews since the Holocaust.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and take some phone calls. You mentioned people becoming ACLJ champions. Let's start with the champion. That's the one that gives on a monthly recurring basis. And we thank you, Carrie, who's calling in Montana on line 1. You're on the air.
Yes, hi. My vote would be for Logan Sekulow. With his anchor and platform experience, to request a debate or whatever you would want to call it, interview with Kamala Harris Imhoff and make her answers legitimately, quit blaming, quit lying like she does with the Trump debate. She said, you're going to hear a lot of lies up here today. It was coming from her, just like recently when she commented just last night with, the American people's strong allies with, we want to know if Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are allies of Israel, because they obviously are not. Thank you, guys. Jordan, I hope you wear her out. I hope you get a hold of her and have an interview with her and make her answer, are you and Joe Biden allies of Israel?
Well, Carrie, we'll push for that. We'll at least put in the request. Why not? We'll put in a request for everybody, as we always do.
Yeah, I think.
But we
I'm sure
appreciate.
have
Do I think they're going to say yes? I think probably not.
I think it was hard to get him on The View. It's probably
The View, and now she's doing Howard Stern and all these other podcasts and radio shows. So you never know. But Carrie, I appreciate your comments. Thank you for all your support and support of the ACLJ, and even just your thoughts on us, which we always appreciate. It's very kind. Let's continue on. Let's go to Michael, who's calling in Florida. Listen on Sirius XM. Michael, you're on the air.
Gentlemen, here in Tampa, Florida, getting everything buttoned up. I just wanted to make the comment that I, like a lot of other people, have got a few primary things that I am going to vote on that's going to affect my vote. But if I were to say what my number one priority is, I want to vote for the person who stands unapologetically in full alliance with Israel.
Well, Michael, it's very nice to hear from you and to hear that kind of response, even from our listeners. It's a divided time, even amongst what you'd say are conservative voters or conservative listeners, where there has been some split with the support of Israel, and obviously we know that we definitely should be supporting our own in America and making sure that they are protected and safe, whether that's our friends and family in North Carolina or in Georgia or now in Florida coming up. And Michael, we're praying for you, praying for everybody in the Central Florida area, essentially my hometown of Orlando. So it's somewhere that is very close to us. So, Michael, we appreciate you calling in. We appreciate your support of Israel and that you're voting that way. I don't know if that's going to be most people's number one, but the fact that some people are out there still thinking that still putting Israel as their number one topic, that makes me feel good. So I'm glad you called in. Let's take one more call for the day. Anne's calling in Pennsylvania. Anne, you're on the air.
Hey, love you guys so very much. Before I make my amazing point that your call screener actually loved, I just want to say, vote early if that's the only way for you to vote or if it's your choice. But voting early should not be a remedy for the potential election day interference that could easily take place in North Carolina or any other state for that matter. Now, I also wanted to say that with the government, we want the government. The government is required to help people, the people who suffer from a natural disaster. Yep. We want the government to help, but they're not helping in this case. I don't understand. They interfere with everything else.
Right. It does feel like, and we're only cutting you off because we're running out of time.
I mean, they ignored that.
Yeah, these are the moments
she's
not right.
Visuals that they don't want to show Harris right before an election with bad visuals.
There are times when you want the federal government to make sure that they're there for a reason.
This is why we pay taxes.
This is why they're there, and this is when failure always seems to happen. Whether, like you said, whether that's the railroads, whether that's situations that happen all over natural disasters, it always seems to fall back on this.
It is a good reminder, though, if you are in that path of this new hurricane and you can vote, maybe you go vote today. Yeah. Because if you got our previous caller said,
you never know what can happen.
No, that's why early voting can be something you utilize. So think about it if you're potentially in the line doing that as well.
Yep, support the work of the ACLJ. Also, we need your support of Israel, and we can do it with you. Go to aclj.org, defend Israel, scan that QR code on your screen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.